Alright, YouTube, it's time to talk about the Strauss Howe generational theory, this sort of 20 to 25 year clusters of generation that cycle in four different motions throughout the eras of mankind. Now, I will point out first, in the interest of full disclosure, the Strauss Howe generational theory system overlooks the world at large and primarily focuses on just the West. It has other limitations as well, but generally speaking, it's a pretty good system. It's fairly accurate. You can retroactively apply it to past generations. Certainly, the generations that have come after the theory was sort of thought of generally fit into this mold. Again, in a general sense, not necessarily to every last letter of the description of each generation, but generally speaking, it's pretty accurate. My generation, I'm a millennial. My generation fucked up a little bit. Now, part of it's not our fault. The baby boomers and Gen Xers sort of went along with the globalist line for so long that we got spoon-fed this swill, this bullcrap by them. But at the same time, a lot of people in my generation are still deep asleep. They don't really understand what's going on in the world. They have a great academic, a great intellectual capacity to understand what's going on, but they choose to primarily just focus on a bunch of bullcrap. They're still stuck in like the two-party dichotomy and so forth. Now, many years ago, almost a decade ago now actually, back in 2007 when I first became more active, you could say, in an internet sense. Before that, I didn't have a social media presence, certainly. 2007 is when I began sort of going through the internet and building what is now a fairly decent infrastructure. At the time, I was hopeful that my generation, which was still on the younger side, barely entering the civic square for the first time, we're supposedly a civic, heroic generation. I was hoping that my generation would be deeply distrustful of authority, anti-war, that it would question the establishment more. And we see the awakening of my generation beginning, but it's kind of belated. Unlike maybe the hippie generation or something like that, it took us quite a bit longer to reach our prime of being pissed off by the powers that be. Now, we're the ones that are supposed to be actively trying to reform them so that Generation Z can overthrow the paradigm entirely. When we start getting older, we'll be the masters of a new paradigm that hopefully Generation Z will have improved by the time that happens. I will tell you this. Based on what I know of Generation Z, those that are just barely beginning to enter adulthood, with conversations with people from that generation and so forth, what I've seen of their workings in the world so far, I have much more faith in the generation after mine than in my own generation. My generation is still too asleep to do much in the world, and to the point at which Generation X, oddly enough, right now is more awoken as far as what's going on in the world, as far as how fucked up shit really is. My generation's main contribution is things like memetics, which can be used to great effect. What I worry about is that 30, 40 years down the line, when we're the ones controlling the power structures of the world, that'll be misused, that it'll be the same old propaganda and so forth. And I see another problem on the horizon, which is we're entering a period of social alienation roughly commensurate with that of the pre-World War II era. The problem being, this is the first time we're going to have the true unraveling and alienation period since the atomic era began. Before the atomic era began at the end of the last unraveling, at the end of the last negative period of human cycles. What's happened, though, is that things restabilized for a while, then began to unravel again, and we're in the throes of that now, headed towards complete alienation in the coming decade or so. And this is the first time that very, potentially destabilizing period of time for the Western world will occur overlapping with nuclear weaponry. And that's why I say if we survive this cycle, we'll be lucky. And if we do, it's just a matter of wait another 70, 80 years and we might be at hazard again. Because that's the part of this four-part cycle that could be the most dangerous. We see massive fights break out in prior periods of human history. We see the Civil War, we see World War II, and so forth. The next one is right around the corner. it could get very, very messy indeed. In fact, we see the violence proliferating all over the world anyway. The problem is when the West goes through this generation of instability, in which my generation is supposed to try to reform things, Generation Z is supposed to take the reins, reform it further. We may not be able to do that. Things are so strangulated, so corrupted at this point. It's not clear we're going to be able to do so. This is also, I will say this, I know that some people believe, oh, the Masons made the United States, we're just a corporation under the British Empire and all that sort of conspiratorial nonsense, none of which is true. Since the death of JFK, we haven't had autonomous leadership in the Western world. We've had controlled leadership, which is why I say Trump, of course, is a mild reformer. He wouldn't be in that position if he were a true revolutionary mind. He's simply a mild reformer, and that's better than the alternative. We need, right now, however mild it might be, we need some sort of reform. Otherwise, things spiral out of control. I would prefer to see that Generation Z is not the last generation that comes of age because we lay waste to the world in a nuclear annihilation scenario. But I have better faith in them, honestly. Those that are, a decade or so younger than me, too, considerably younger. I think that they are more keyed into what's going on in the world. We see the tales, for instance, in the wake of Trump winning. You see that a bunch of kids in like elementary schools and stuff were shouting "Build the Wall" and "Hail Trump" and stuff like that in their elementary and middle schools. That they seem to like the idea of political incorrectness. They're a rebellious generation, a Luciferian generation, you might say. That's directly based on the result. Look at who's raising them. Young Gen Xers, older millennials are starting to raise up children. They're extremely rebellious. They see what we've done as an abomination, number one. They see authority as irrelevant, number two. They see the world as supremely fucked up, number three. And I happen to agree with them. They're completely right when they denote this fact. What's happening, thus, is that the generation after mine, the Generation Zers, you could say, will be a great generation. My generation won't be. There will be a few people who stand out in my generation who try to forge a way so that Generation Z can get things accomplished. That's all at this point that we can really do. Then we will take the reins of what they are helping to build and reform over time. Hopefully it doesn't get fucked up by some future generation. And hopefully it will be halfway decent. My generation was not supposed to fail as hard as it's currently failing. I see a lot of millennials. It's decreasing over time. That's a good thing. But there are a lot of millennials who trust the establishment, who think that the lamestream media is true and that anything new is a lie, who believe that war is not really war if it's covert and it's conducted by drone strike, and so we don't need to protest that because our president's got a D after his name, and all that crap, and we need PC bullcrap and safe spaces and social justice, and art shouldn't represent anything. It's basically like the Dadaism period. You're talking, around the time of World War I or something like that. It overlaps with that prior period of time to some extent as well. And it's crazy. It's stupid what's going on in the world today. The fact that many of my fellow millennials eat it up. You gotta realize, if you're subscribed to my channel, if you're watching my content, chances are if you're a millennial, you're one of those who understands how screwed up the world is. You might have joined my channel when I was primarily talking about libertarianism, a rising millennial ideology. It's probably the one good thing we're doing. You might be a alt-right, you might be a civic nationalist or something like that. There's a good chance that you are, and you're certainly not a Hillary Clinton fan. You might be a Bernie fan, and be like really far left, an actual leftist, but you're probably not a neoliberal, let's face it. But you're in the minority. I'm in the minority. We have to understand, those of us, those millennials among us, who are not a bunch of PC neoliberals, who think that if you offend someone you should go to prison, we're the minority within this generation. Generation Z, on the other hand, makes us look like a bunch of hippies. They are extremely conservative. It's very, very funny to see. We've got the rise of a new conservative youth it's based on youth rebellion. Here's the thing that people don't understand. When they look at that ideology, they think it's some like deeply ingrained, they're going to be a bunch of stuffy Republicans. No. That's not what's happening. They're rebels. They're Luciferians. They are a rebel generation. And that's really, really good because they're rebelling against us and against the Gen Xers. And the Gen Xers and millennials are, social justice is great. Globalism is great. Multiculturalism is wonderful. We should bend over backwards for Islam. At the same time, oddly, we excoriate Christianity. We're going to get a bunch of tattoos and sleep around and get AIDS or something. That's what the Gen Xers and the millennials are stereotyped as having done. Now, that's not universally the case. Like, I don't have any tattoos. I don't like sleeping around. I don't like one-night stands and stuff like that. So I'm probably, oddly, on a social level, oddly enough, I'm more on the conservative side of my generation, gay marriage and abortion notwithstanding. But Generation Z is rebelling against the social norms that we have perpetuated. Those that are some of the propagandistic leftist boomers that are now in power, especially within politics, have passed a bunch of crappy-ass globalist policies that they expect everybody else to live by to make them miserable. And they've got ulterior motives. It's not because of ethics. They don't care about what happens to the refugees. If they did, they wouldn't be making so many refugees by bombing people constantly. They don't care about that. It's a covert war. But that norm that they've developed and that my generation unfortunately has gobbled down hook, line, and sinker is being rebelled against by the coming generation. Good. Destroy it. Those of us who are awake within the millennials will try to help you the best we can. But don't expect much help from my fucking generation, because 99% of them are still a bunch of social justice warriors, or, perhaps just as bad, they're a bunch of right-wing partisan demagogues, or they're so bitter. Some of those that wake up, that realize what's going on, they get so bitter they become completely apolitical. They're not going to help you at all. They won't stand in your way, but they're certainly not going to join your ranks and try to help you reform the way the world is conducting business, because they're so bitter they don't think it can be reformed. We have this from generation to generation. This happens regardless, really, of what the paradigm is at a time. My generation is a heroic civic generation insofar as a small minority of my generation is heroic and involved with activism and civics. Most of them, their idea of activism is, hey, we're going to raise money on Facebook for this random person because her car hit a tree or something like that. They think that saying amen and sharing the Facebook post changes the world. It doesn't change the world. You've been completely duped. And you believe everything that you see on CNN and read in the Wall Street Journal, which is crazy, honestly. It's to the point where I look like a hippie compared to most of my generation, even while at the same time completely excoriating and completely lambasting globalism. I reject it completely. I'm one of a few from within my generation to do that. There are more Gen Xers probably at this point that reject globalism because they took those blue-collar jobs that then got destroyed by the Great Recession because of things like NAFTA. It's funny. The Gen Xers, the ones that were constantly fucking each other and getting the tattoos and laying the groundwork for my generation, sort of far leftism in some senses, they're now arguably more woken than many members of my generation. So the millennials are, in essence, both the best and the worst. We're the best in that a few of us are pretty keyed in to the use of propaganda. We're trying to flip it on its head and improve the world, save it from globalism, save it from proxy wars and all this crap, moral laws and all the other nonsense that other generations have always been hoodwinked by. But we're the worst in the sense that a great many of us are completely asleep. You can't count on them for anything. My best advice to the generation after mine, those that are just entering adulthood, to those who are, just entering their double digits of age, honestly, don't listen to the millennials. Don't listen to my generation, generally speaking. Judge everything that we say with a grain of salt. If it sounds like it's sensible, okay, maybe accept it. Otherwise, you're just getting a bunch of social justice warrior stuff. A lot of those millennials are going to tell you, yeah, you go get a tattoo and go twerking and stuff. You're like 10, 11 years old and they're telling you to do that. It's a bunch of bullcrap. It's not normal. None of it is. It's not. It's not mentally normal at all. It's a complete overhaul of the social system of mankind, forsaking all human wisdom. That's what a lot of millennials, unfortunately, are doing right now. And younger Gen Xers, too, of course. If you're Generation Z, only the oldest tier of millennials could possibly be giving birth to you. Like I don't even know if they'd be old enough to even competently use YouTube. I know some people these days are like 3 years old using a smartphone. It's actually funny because when I was like 3, we had the basic rudiments of modern computers. We're talking like 1992, 1993. We didn't even have Windows 95 yet. And Windows 95 ultimately was crappy. Except for Tyrian. That game was great. The Destruct subgame in it was... I must have spent thousands of hours playing that when I was a kid. It was hilarious. Zinglon Zale is about the funniest thing that was ever put in a video game, computer game. But that's a different aside. Yes, in the Strauss Howe theory, Generation Z is going to be superior to the millennials. More keyed in, more distrustful of authority. Good. Good. Keep distrusting it. Don't conform. Don't consent to their stupidity. Including when my generation gets 10, 20 years older and we're finding our ways, we're becoming professors and teachers and all that, and politicians. Don't trust them, because they're probably not worth being trusted. Make sure to look into their histories, what they've done throughout their lives, and judge appropriately. That would be some advice. And never listen to the lamestream media. Because all those corporate heads and banks that own them, they're the same ones that are going to try to screw you on student loans and stuff. And consider whether it's even worth your time, by the way, to go to college. Because you may find that it's not necessary. We got the internet now. You can look up all the course books online. Primary sources. Millions of them. Go to archive.org. Look up anything. You can find these for free. You can give yourself a classical education without dealing with a bunch of debt. That's partially what I did. I did drive up student debt. Most, though, of what I know about religion, anthropology, and so forth, I didn't get it in a college course. One of the few courses that I ever took that was worth the money that I was paying to take it was like archaeology of the Caribbean. I mean, you're not going to find much about that. Online's kind of a special topic. Or paganism and Christianity. That was a good course. It was also interesting. The professor was like this crazy old lady, but she was so smart, she'd just sit there rambling for hours and knocking off fact after fact, date after date, name after name. It's like, how do you remember all this stuff? I certainly couldn't do that. I can ramble for a good long time, but not in that level of depth. She should have been like she should have just lectured all day. It would have been great. I would have just sat there 24/7 just to listen to her. She must have been a super genius. She must have been approaching Einstein levels of IQ to be able to do this. That generation, it's really funny. Like the older boomers and people who are almost like, a great generation, they're more keyed into reality than a lot of millennials are. How sad can it possibly be? We've been inundated with propaganda since the day we were born. Even the cartoons we watched as kids were propaganda. It's like, I enjoyed Captain Planet. Captain Planet was fine, but it was also propaganda. In the most literal sense, the creator of the cartoon said, yeah, it's environmental propaganda. It was. It was to convince people, don't pollute and recycle stuff, and we must fight greenhouse gases. Now, I don't have any problem with environmentalism. I agree with all of that completely, other than maybe the climate change angle that they're using to try to make people afraid these days. But at the same time, let's get real. It was propaganda. Again, propaganda can be positive. I would say keeping the earth clean, trying to take care of trash that's lying around and not littering. Yeah, that's a positive thing. I don't have any problem with that. But trying to convince people using a kid's TV show, it is propaganda. This has been done throughout time. It's like when the Flintstones were smoking, Winston's or whatever. Yeah, it's it's an advertising scheme. Oh yeah, Fred, I just love these Winstons. Let's go out back. No, that's the way that it works. No different. It's the same today. You go on the internet, you see some of these ads like on YouTube. Why do you think I use like an ad blocker? I don't want to see that crap. You see ads on YouTube or whatever for all of these different religious groups and corporations and banks. Subsidize your loans. Consolidate. Let's get a mortgage. It's like, yeah, like any millennial can afford your mortgage anyway to begin with for the most part. It's a clusterfuck. The younger generation hopefully will be smarter than mine in dealing with it and more rebellious. Because I sat there. I was rebellious. I was like Luciferian youth mode. So I never trusted the establishment media or all these crazy-ass politicians, most of which were 3 times my age, sitting there getting rich in D.C. Or all these retards on TV, they're pulling in a 7-figure salary. But I saw a lot of other people from my generation that started off, in some cases, just as rebellious, slowly succumbing to the nonstop 24/7 barrage of propaganda. Really, really sad. We should have done better. I tried the best that I could to reorient as many people as I could, but you know, my ability to do that until the last year or so has been far more limited. Now it's quite a bit larger, which is great. It just goes to show there are a few people within this generation that are going to be able to drive public consciousness. But when you think about it, there are also people like boomers and Gen Xers. Like Ramsey Paul is, I think, like an older Gen Xer, or like a young boomer or something like that. He's more awoken than a lot of people my age. You know, we're half his age or something. A lot of them are deep asleep. It's actually very funny. That's about all. Peace out.